plan to not be inspired. Like, plan to have moments where you're sitting there and like, I don't know what to write. Hey, Rangers. So this week, your assignment is to make a roadmap for your chart. So let me tell you a little bit about what that means. So a roadmap is basically just the plan you have of what you intend your arrangement to have in it. So it's basically listing all the different sections that it will have, and then saying what's going to happen in each section. For the purposes of this class, your chart is going to need to have a whole bunch of sections. And that's so we learn how all those sections work together. In reality, when you go to create a piece for a combo, especially, but for any ensemble, you might not need that many sections, or they might be sort of smaller in scope. One of the great things about combo writing, small group jazz writing, is that freedom and that flexibility that we have from all of the individual musicians and the players, their ability to sort of shape the course of a performance, of a piece of music. And so, the more you write, then the less of that individual freedom the players have. So we're always sort of balancing that, how much we want to be giving musicians enough direction that it forces creativity. But we also, if we give them too much direction, then they can feel limited in what they get to do as an individual. So particularly when you're dealing with combo writing, it's a really fine line to walk. If you're writing for big band, then you're gonna generally have a really more planned out chart. That's sort of the nature of big band. You've got so many musicians on stage; they all kind of need to have the same thing planned. Whereas if you've got a duo, if there were two people playing together, you probably don't want to give too much direction on everything, or else it's going to limit their creative freedom a little bit. Part of what's so great about duo is just the interaction between the two people. So I find with sextet, which is what you are all writing for, again, just a reminder, you're going to be writing for a trumpet, either alto or tenor saxophone, trombone, piano, bass, and drums, okay? That's what you're writing for this class. After this class, you are welcome to revise it for whatever instrumentation you want. But for this class, it will be for those 6 instruments exclusively. So yeah, it can get, I usually find I have some combo charts that I write that do have all of the sections we're going to be talking about. And they do feel a little fussy, but they're fun to play. But I try to always balance them by also having something that it has fewer predetermined sections and gives the musicians a little more opportunity to develop the music in a more free kind of way. So I always find that balance is really helpful. It's fun for the band and it's fun for the audience. If you kind of can do something that's more arranged and then follow it with something that's less arranged. That's what works for my band. Different bands, you come up with your own aesthetic and what works for the people that are playing. But for the purposes of this class, because we need to learn about writing all these sections, you will need to have a whole bunch of sections, and we're going to go over them now. And then we are also going to, as we go to write each section, because we have different sections do different weeks, we will go over each type of section in more depth and how it functions. So right now, you are learning as you go. I just a reminder, in this class, you do happen to come out of this class with a thing that you've arranged, but that's not the point of this class, right? I don't care about the quality of whatever your arrangement, your final arrangement is. And if it's something, that's more just an excuse for you to learn all this stuff. And you get to be creative with it, but the main point is that you are learning all of these different sections. So you've got to take your creative idea and make sure that you can get all these sections to fit into it. And that's a little bit different than what I sometimes, I'm often talking about, like hearing where the music wants to go. And there are times when possibly with this, you might be like, it really doesn't want to have that type of ending. And I'll say, okay, that's fine. You don't have to actually end up using that type of ending. But for our purposes, you have to go and write that type of ending. And then it is the easiest thing in the world to just cross it out after you're done. You know what I mean? Like, so in other words, there might be some sections that you write for the purposes of this class. And then if you decide you want to perform the song in the future, you say, okay, well, let's cross that part out. We don't want it. And I have charts like that. I have charts where that wasn't even the intention, but like where I wrote something and, years later I'll be like, that's too fussy. Nobody wants that. Sometimes I'll just do that for that performance. I'll just be like, because we just did this song, I don't really feel like doing the interlude. Let's not do that section. So it's always better, I think, to have written the section and then cross it out later. It's really easy to do that in rehearsal. It's much harder to not have something show up at rehearsal and say, oh, shoot, I wish we had an interlude. And there's not really much you can do about it at rehearsal. So it's always ideal to have the interlude all ready to go. And then you get to rehearsal and say, we don't really need that, and cross it out. So for this class, you've got to write all these sections. That's what our class is. And then in the future, you can cross them out if you want. Same for instrumentation. In the future, you can, if you are a guitar player, you can change it to guitar instead of piano. If you're a vocalist, you can, incorporate voice in the future. But for our class, we're writing for trumpet, saxophone, trombone, piano, bass, and drums. Okay. So, I'm just looking at my notes. Okay, so one thing that is really good about this roadmap is we're going to be writing all these different sections, and while not every chart has to have all of these sections in real life, in our class, all the charts have to have all these sections. In real life, not all charts have to have all these sections, but start having as kind of your default setting that charts have these sections, that they have more composed elements to them, that it's not just head solos head. I think for a lot of people in the jazz world, they think of head solos head as their default for arranging, and everything else is seen as like bonus, like, ooh, they wrote an intro, right? You don't want to to think of that as your default setting, right? You want to think of your default setting is that your charts have intros and they have solos and backgrounds and special endings and shout choruses or interludes. Like, they have lots of sections. And for me, when I go to write, not every chart has all these sections, right? I'm hearing where they want to go. But I start with the idea that they all can have all these sections. And then I for reason, might decide that a chart doesn't need all these sections. I might say, it doesn't actually, need backgrounds here. That doesn't help. Or it doesn't actually need an extended ending here. That doesn't help. Or for an intro, I might decide a song is better without an intro, that it just is better to start right on it. But my default setting is always that it has all these sections. And then it is like, after giving it some thought, I might decide not to have a section. So you want that to become your default setting. You don't want head solos head to be your default setting, or else you never write the other sections. And those other sections are what really that's where you really come into your own as an arranger. It's where you can really shape a piece of music. With how all those things work together, how all the different sections come together. Okay, so the different sections. So the first section is the introduction, and all of you need to write an introduction, and it needs to be an actual written introduction. It can't just be a vamp. If you want there to be a vamp before the head comes in, then write something that happens before the vamp that goes into the vamp. And when we get to intros, I'll give you some, that week I'll give you some ideas of things. But you might have a horn chorale that happens before the rhythm section comes in with the time. You might have a fanfare. You might have some sort of treatment of the melody, or something to set it up, but you need something actually written for the introduction. And we'll get into that when we get into intro week. But for now, just figure out, give some thought to possibly, with all of these things, you want to be thinking about, which instruments you're using in a section, if it's everybody or just the horns or just the rhythm section, who has the melody, who has the counterpoint, who has the harmony, if there is those things, what the rhythm section's doing. And then sort of in a big picture, if you don't know all that stuff for all these sections yet, that's okay. Probably in a bigger picture, though, what you do really need is like dynamic markings, indication of like what type of tempo or groove is happening. And by the way, dynamic markings, so that's, piano, mezzo forte, forte. Tempo markings, that you might have like a rubato introduction, so out of time. And then the rhythm section might kick in with some kind of groove, and maybe the groove goes to double time or something on the solos, something like that. So you want to be indicating those things. And then one of the big things I find super, super helpful with all these sections is indicating, I usually use like an adjective and something really clear, angry, happy, fun, like just one adjective for a section is usually enough, so that I can get a real clear sense in my mind what I'm after in that section. So you might not know exactly what your intro is going to be, but you can know if it's going to be happy or sad, if it's going to be fast or slow, if it's going to be just the horns or everybody. And this roadmap this is a good plan, but it's something that, you can change later. When you get to a section, you might say, oh, it really wants to do something else. So it's okay to make that change going forward. Don't feel pressure to get everything exactly perfect on this roadmap. But you want to have ideas in there, and then so that you're giving yourself something to react to, and a sense of how it's all going to fit together. And like I said, you can change it later, but that's a good way to go to start. So you've got your intro. Then you have your in-head. You're going to want to indicate probably And by in head, that means when you play the main melody of the tune. This is like what's in your lead sheet. So the main melody of the tune, it happens towards the beginning, and so you want to consider what the form of the tune is. If it's like an AABA, you can really use those different sections, or if it's ABAC, or if it's blues, but especially AABA or ABAC or whatever the form is, you can use those sections you can kind of divide them up in the roadmap and say, okay, on the first A, we'll have alto saxophone solo. On the second A, we'll have all the horns come in harmony, and we'll have the trumpet on the melody. On the bridge, we'll have the tenor saxophone on the melody and a counter line from the trumpet and trombone. And then on the outhead, we'll have all the horns together in harmony or whatever. And you might say, and then the rhythm section will have some sort of ostinato part, and we'll have the first A will be piano, and the second A will be mezzo piano, and the bridge will be crescendoing and reach a forte, and then we'll come down to suddenly piano on the last A section. So those are the kinds of things you can, and then you can put in there. You can also, an adjective is going to help too, so maybe mysterious or joyful or, passionate, whatever, whatever it is, like that's going to help. And even if you in your head sort of know it right now, I'm always thinking about this stuff as like, okay, I mean, maybe it's just I'm old, but like, I forget stuff. So I might have an idea really clear as day in my head, and like 2 days later, I've lost that feeling. So I try to write down like little ideas to sort of help me remember what I was thinking about. So a lot of times this stuff that I'm writing down, I just keep it there to help me think about it. Even sometimes I don't write now in my current office, but for many years in my different offices I worked in, I'd keep pieces of paper up that just had like musical terms written on them, like, melody, harmony, counterpoint, orchestration, dynamics, space, texture, color, timbre, like, and then, I also kept a list of like things from the West African core of music. So things like polyrhythm, polymeter, metronomic time, call and response, like pentatonic scales, vocal like timbres, like, and I would just have these lists like hanging around so that, they're just there to kind of, once in a while I might look up and get inspired about, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about texture, or I hadn't thought about call and response. That's an idea. So keeping stuff around you that you can look at while you're in the thick of it. Plan to not be inspired. Like, plan to have moments where you're sitting there and like, I don't know what to write. And if you know that you're going to experience a moment like that, then, like, in other words, I guess I set a low bar for what I think I'm going to be capable of in terms of like recalling my emotions and whatever. So I keep stuff around to give me stuff to think about when I go to write, and just have it written out. Don't plan on being inspired. Plan on saying, oh, I need to do this. Okay, so that's what you do for your in-head. And by the way, I will every year when I teach this class ordinarily, in person, the way we do it in class is the class all kind of democratically votes on all of the different things that we'll have. So we pick what tune we'll do, and we do kind of a reharm together, and we decide all kinds of stuff about it, and we come up with a roadmap together. So I'm going to send some pictures from the board, from from years past of some of the roadmaps we've come up with that you guys can sort of use as examples and see what types of things we're writing down on the roadmaps. But you definitely want to have the roadmap so you want to have the roadmap, speaking of having things written out to keep you focused while you're writing. I usually have my lead sheet and my roadmap like sitting right there while I'm arranging a piece of music, as just like for reference, but so the roadmap, not only does it remind you what it is you're going to be doing, but it also serves as kind of a to-do list. Like, oh yeah, I need to make this happen in this section. I need to make this happen in this section. Mike Mossman, great arranger, writes a lot for big band. He's the fastest big band writer I've ever known. I was his assistant in New York for when I lived there, and he can do a big band chart start to finish in 3 hours. But what he does that makes that possible is he has a really good roadmap going into it, and he just does it on like a 3x5 index card, and then he has his plan and he executes it, and that's something he talks about. It's like, you make your plan and you execute it. So if you say, I'm gonna have a shout chorus of trumpets and they're gonna do this, and then you do that, and you don't, that's how you approach it. And so having the roadmap is a really good way to keep yourself on task and make sure that you come up with something that all fits together. So you're also going to have solos in your arrangement. And you might have multiple solos. They could have different solo changes. Like your first solo might have one set of chord changes. Your second solo might have another set of chord changes. And you're also going to have backgrounds for your solos. And so that's where, let's say one horn player is improvising, and then you've got the other two horn players playing some kind of melody, like counter melody behind them, or maybe some chords or something. And you get to decide whether you're going to have it go solo straight into another solo, or if there's going to be something in between the two solos. So you might have some sort of transitions, some sort of which would be a send-off. And that's optional as far as this class goes in terms of transition sections. But we'll talk about them at some point. But what you definitely, every chart needs to have is either an interlude or a shout chorus. So this is more than like a vamp. They're sections that really stand on their own. An interlude typically goes like somewhere in the middle of the chart, and it's usually kind of, it's often a different sort of like contrasting section, but not necessarily. It can just be development. But it's a section that usually will stand on its own. And it's often in the middle of the chart. It fits oftentimes, in between solos, like one time in between, if you have two solos, like in between the first and second solo, having an interlude there can be nice. Another option, if you don't do an interlude, would be a shout chorus. The shout chorus typically happens towards the end of the tune. It's usually right before the outhead, right before, so if you're playing the melody of the tune out, usually the shout chorus comes right before that, and it's usually over the same chord changes as the melody of the tune. Sometimes if it's a long song form, if it's like a long AABA, the shout chorus might actually be like the first two A's, and then you'll take the bridge out for the outhead. And then you'll need to write a real ending for the song. Again, if in reality you're like, I don't want there to be a long extended ending, then just, write the ending for this class and then you can cross it out later. But push yourself. See if you can come up with an ending that works. The ending might be some sort of variation on the in-head, but it might go somewhere different. Or it might, just be like pure expansion from the in-head. So a lot of times, like for a nice ending to me, a lot of times if I'm wanting to feel that expansive sense, might be taking the, like let's say the bridge out. It might be taking that, but then letting it expand, like explode into something, and maybe it goes some new direction. Or, your ending might be, you might do the head out, but then go into some other new section. Maybe some sort of like cool groove that gets expanded on. Maybe some part of the last A, like you end up wanting to develop. But anyway, come up with a real ending. That's the main thing. I want all of this. I want us not to be going with what's easy. I want us to really figure out ways to approach these sections. It can even be, a standard type of ending where you kind of, are play the last line of the song like a few times to make it feel more ending. But give it, really write it out, figure out what that is going to be. Maybe it modulates. Okay, so those are all the sections, and I'm going to, these are in the syllabus, and I'm going to I will include the notes from what I'm lecturing on right now. I'll send that along. They probably don't make a ton of sense without seeing me talk, but probably after you see me talk, then they'll be able to remind you of things. I'm just looking at my notes to see other things for me to mention. So I said, you want to describe moods, you want to include dynamics, tempo, grooves, adjectives, all of that for the different sections. You also, something that's really helpful is to always think about, two things. Think about like the overall climax of the song. That can be really useful. Thinking about like where is the most like intense part of your composition. Usually it's going to be like around 75% of the way through your chart, so that's as you organize your roadmap, you can think about it that way. Because gosh, if you think about it, you wouldn't want like 10% of the way through your tune you hit your most intense moment, and then you've got multiple minutes of downhill. That's the definition of anticlimactic. So usually like 75% of the way through is where the most intense moment's going to be. But you get to figure out the shape of your story. There's going to be lots of hills and valleys, and you might end on a big place too. You might end small. You might start in a big place. You might start small. So you get to decide all of those things. Something that's really helpful, Thad Jones talks about, like he thinks about each section as like leading to an event. Every section in a chart. So whatever it is, he's always like leading towards some moment in the section of that song. And I find that really helpful to think about. After a while, it becomes almost habitual, where you're really thinking like, oh, this is the spot that everything is leading to in this section. So you want each section to have their kind of moment that everything is leading to, and then each section to lead to the other sections, and then the chart overall to have a shape to it. And you get to decide what that is. And then, of course, the musicians are also going to bring shape to it too, So that's one thing as arrangers that's really important for us, is to not get too attached to once we give it to other people, we have to allow them to interpret, at least in jazz. That's probably the biggest difference, I think, between us jazz arrangers and like classical people who are working for writing like contemporary classical music. I always find that they're like really extremely specific, and like the players are just like, what does the composer want here? How do I get it exactly how they imagine it? And to me, I don't want that. I want to be able to give something to a musician and then see what they do with it, what they bring to it. So that's sort of a constant thing to balance. But you gotta, it definitely helps. You want to make things as clear as you can in your chart of what your intention is, and then hopefully a good player will be able to take all of that and just bring out your intention even more than you imagined. That's kind of the ideal. So anyway, you are learning as you go with this. I don't expect your charts to be perfect. I don't expect your roadmaps to be perfect. I expect you will probably, you'll turn in your draft of your roadmap. I might look at it and be like, okay, and I might make some suggestions to you. And then as you work through the chart, you might want to make some changes from your roadmap. And then the nice thing, though, is the next time you go to arrange a chart, you will have a better sense of how the roadmaps, how all the sections work together. So don't worry about getting it right. Just make something. That's the main thing. You are going to learn by doing. It doesn't matter if it turns out good. It just matters that you do it and go through this process. That's how you will learn. Yeah, please let me know what questions you have. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing your roadmaps. And I'll share these lecture notes. But yeah, let me know what questions you've got. All right, everybody, have a good week. Have fun with this. Bye.